All right.
No.
Welcome, everybody. This is February's JaxNode meeting. Tonight the subject is going to be Tailwind CSS. So decided to kind of take a look. I've been hearing a lot about Tailwind, and I was curious about whether or not I should be using this or be taking a look at it. And so this would be a good subject for tonight. So I'd like to go ahead and start by saying that we're always looking for presenters. If anybody's interested in presenting, we are meeting in person. But if for whatever reason, if you need to be able to present from, let's say, a remote location, we're doing these meetings over Zoom now as well, so we can do that, do the meetings over Zoom. So if you need to, you can just do it from home or from your office or whatever. So if anybody's interested, please let me know. Either send me an email or DM me, because we're looking for somebody other than just myself for doing these this presentations. Yeah.
I said I can volunteer.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Give me a guess.
All right. So I figured I'd start a little bit with the history of CSS. Use this little graphic here because CSS is awesome. And there's actually a t-shirt you can buy with this on it, with the awesome going outside the bounds of the box, which I think is a good analogy. So when I first started doing web development, CSS hadn't been introduced yet into the browsers. And so with the Netscape Navigator 2.0 browser, they introduced a concept called tables. And so when we first started laying things out or having the capability of being able to lay stuff out, pretty much all we had was tables to do that. And so there's been a whirlwind of change and stuff that's come since those initial browsers first came out. But CSS actually CSS1 first was introduced in 1996. That was pretty simple. You could basically tell you want a bold of font or something like that. There used to be a tag called the font tag, which I thought was pretty interesting. But those have since been deprecated from HTML. And then it started to get a little bit serious. Around 1998, CSS3 was introduced, and that allowed what they referred to as CSSP, or positioning. And you could actually start to kind of like get things to float to one side or the other, and it made it you didn't have to use tables to lay things out, but it wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And then there's some tools and stuff that started coming out just in the last 10 years or so. LESS and SAS are like these CSS preprocessors, which are really good at being able to let you kind of create multi-browser type of styles and stuff that you can use, and it does things that takes browser-specific features and stuff and lets you kind of embed them into your styles. And then probably about a little more 5 years ago, Twitter Bootstrap was introduced. And Bootstrap was awesome because you could start to lay out websites without really having to be an expert at CSS and CSS positioning. And they had things like columns and things like that built in. So if you wanted to have like a 4-column layout, you could do that pretty easily with Bootstrap, and they had pretty good examples on their website and stuff on how to do that. There's also competing frameworks like Bulma Foundation. We were just talking about material design a little bit earlier, and so there are these CSS frameworks that have come out that have made it pretty easy to come up with a design and be able to use a design that's based off of common classes and features and stuff that you want to use in your web page design. And then a number of years ago, for exactly when this was first introduced, Flexbox was introduced. And Flexbox makes it a lot easier to try to get things. Like if you wanted to do like a 3-column layout just in CSS, you can do that very easily with Flexbox. And so it made being able to position things a lot easier. And then a little bit more recently, Grid CSS came out. And so I know that's one of the technologies I've been using with my websites that I've been working on the last couple of years is specific for doing specific positioning and stuff like that. I've been using Grid CSS for doing that. But a lot of people they're just happy to have Flexbox. Flexbox gave a lot more flexibility. So there's been, obviously over the last 25 years, there's been a ton of change with the way this stuff works and the kind of tools that are available. But, just over the last, I'd say last year or so, I've been seeing a lot on Tailwind. And so I was kind of curious, is this something I could use, how easy it is to use and stuff like that. And so I started taking a look at it about a month ago. So what exactly is Tailwind CSS? Well, if you look at their website, they describe it as basically as a utility-first CSS framework. And what it does is it gives developers precise control of their design by using these specific CSS class names. And so if we want to take a quick example here. Here's an H1 tag, and it's set up with Flex Auto and then a large text size. They're setting the font to be a semi-bold font, and then they're using a color of Slate 900. And this is a div class here. In this case, they're using a large font. It's semi-bold. It's a different color, text Slate 500. And this example here, they're using the full width. They're setting the flex to none. They're having a small text size with a medium-sized font and setting the text Slate 700. And then there's this little MT-2. That's referring to a margin top of two spaces. So we'll get into spaces and what that means here in a little bit. But that is basically, it's set up so that you can take these different classes, put them together, and then come up with a layout or design that you want very easily. So one of the things I think it's important to note is that if you're using Tailwind, you still have to know CSS. So unlike some of the other frameworks I mentioned before, where they have these predefined classes that, it's like, oh, here's a container, here's a nav bar and stuff like that, where a lot of the stuff is basically pre-built out for you. This is not meant to be that. This is meant to give you precise control. It's a little bit lower level of a framework. But that being said, there's certain things you can do with it that can simplify the types of designs and stuff and they have a good article on their website talking about how you can use Tailwind specifically and make it reusable. And there's also an apply setting that you can also use as well if you want to have like a common class with a bunch of different classes that are part of that. And I'll show an example of that a little bit later. So how does Tailwind work? Well, essentially what you do is you define a input CSS file. And usually this input CSS file is just going to have these directives in. So for instance, like there's like a very common CSS file that I've seen a lot of developers use called a reset.css. Well, they have a directive that basically does all of that. And so you can just include this one directive. It includes all that stuff basically in one line of code. The next thing that it does is it takes uses a build process, and the way the build process works is that it actually takes a look at all the different classes that you're using inside of your design in your pages. And what it'll do is it will take those different classes and stuff that you're using, and it will output them in the third step here. Oops. It'll output them just the classes you need. And so that's all part of the build process. And so you have like a base set of classes. If you were to include all of the classes that are in the main 3 directives that people use, it'd probably be like I want to say like a megabyte in size and stuff like that. And so that's not ideal. You only want to include the styles and stuff that you're using in your style sheet. And so they have a build process that scans your HTML and makes sure that you're just including the classes that you need. So some of the basics of Tailwind is that, what you're going to do is you're actually going to use multiple different classes for your design, to style your design. It's mobile first by default. And so when you're actually laying out or doing your designing your pages, it's assuming that you're starting from like the smallest width, you're working on a mobile phone. And then you can set specific sizes after that that you want to change things. So if you want to say make a font smaller or bigger, once you go to a larger screen size, you can do that by specifying what the size is and then a colon. Essentially, it's a directive where you can specify the differences that you want to have based off of the size of the layout. And so that works a lot like media queries. If you're familiar with media queries, essentially you can do the same thing very easily just inside of your class naming. They also have these different states that you can use. So for instance, like if you want to change the color of something once you hover over it, you can say hover colon and then a different color, and it will change the color. So they also are doing that for focus, and there's some other examples of that as well. They also have dark mode support, which I thought was just pretty cool. And that works very similar to like the hover and focus is. If you need something that's going to be, let's say, a different color, once you go to like dark mode and stuff like that, you can just specify that with dark colon, that sort of thing. And they also include all these functions and directives. You can also build out custom styles as well. So if you want to take like, let's say you have a bunch of different styles and stuff that you want to use for, let's say, like a call out box as an example, you can take all the different classes for that, and then you can apply that in your input CSS, and then it will create that class for you and let you use that class in your design. So adding Tailwind. So one of the things I thought was pretty cool when I first started taking a look at this is that this is essentially a Node.js application. So you do have to have Node.js installed in order to be able to use this tool. You just npm install Tailwind CSS, and it lets you use the module for Tailwind. You may need to use a post CSS and auto prefixer depending on which framework you're planning on, application framework you're planning on using, but you can actually, for just a base HTML site and stuff like that, I think you can just get away with using Tailwind CSS. And there's support for many other frameworks as well. And so, like I showed in the previous slide, you put all of your base directives inside of an input CSS. And then there's all this configuring you can do inside of it's called a Tailwind config.js file. And then you can specify like specific things you want to use, like screen sizes and that sort of thing, fonts that you want to use. You can do that inside of your config file. So this is what the input CSS file looks like, just the basic one. So they have a directive for your base. It's kind of like a reset. They have one here for your basic components, and then they have one for utilities. And then your Tailwind config file, the most common thing people usually use this for is for a theme. So you can set up the different screen sizes that you want to use. So if you want to start changing your layout at a specific size, like SM, MD, LG for large, XL for extra large, and stuff like that, you can set that up here inside of your theme. You can also set up specific colors that you want to use, and it will do different variations of that color for you automatically. So it comes up with this naming scheme like -900, -800, with basically you go from darker to lighter when you go to a smaller number. And you can also do things like control the spacing, what size spacing you want to use, and and border radius. But for the examples I'm using tonight, I'm just using the defaults. So this is an example I was talking about before, like if you wanted to use a custom style. So here I have a button class, and I just told it I want to use a button primary. So if you've used something like Bootstrap, for example, they do have like these classes and stuff like that you can use for just styling a button with one specific class. What's nice about this is you can actually come in here and you can define your own class. And what you do is you just take the existing classes that are out there that you normally use for styling that button, and you just do an apply on that. And what it'll do is this class will then use all the traits and properties of these other classes for a new class that you can use. All right, let me do something real quick here. All right. And that brings us to Tailwind CSS. I think this was just released in December or January. This is the newest version. And the thing that's cool about this is that it's got a just-in-time engine. And basically what that means is that what it'll do is it'll actually will go and recompile, rebuild a output CSS file that you can use on the fly. You can actually set it up so that it watches as you're writing your HTML, and it'll automatically create the style sheets and stuff that you need. So only the classes that are used are generated in the output. There's also variants to define different states if you want to apply different styles. There's a large default color palette, so you don't have to add your own colors. I think a lot of people will find the colors that come with Tailwind sufficient, but if you still need to define specific classes or color palettes, you can do that with the theme. And you can also do things like control scroll behavior. These are some of the supported frameworks that are used. So I think a lot of people here, there might be people that are using Vue, they may be using React. And so they offer support in a very easy way for installing this and these different frameworks. So if you're using Next.js, like I've just started using, Create React App, Ruby on Rails, Parcel, Phoenix, even Express, they support all of these different frameworks, even SvelteKit. So this is an example of kind of like designing a button, right? So when you run the base directive, it's going to make the button essentially as simple as possible. It's just going to look like text. There's not going to be any outline or rounded corners or anything like that. So in this example right here, what I've done is I've set up 4 spaces for the padding along the x-axis, and then I've set up 2 spaces along the y-axis, and then I've set it with a background color of green, shade 500, and I've set the text to white, and then I've set it having rounded corners, but larger rounded corners, -XL. And then when you hover over it, it's going to come back with a slightly lighter shade of green with the BG Green 300. So this is another example of how you would lay something out, traditionally using a cascading style sheet. So in this case, I've decided I want it to be display flex direction row, justify the content center. We're going to set the line items for a flex start, and then have a padding of like 12px, 6px. And this is essentially how you do the same thing here, just using the Tailwind. So here you can just specify flex. You don't have to say style display flex. You can also say justify center instead of justify content center, then item start for line items, flex start. And then I'm not sure if these 2 spaces or padding here corresponds to the 12px and 6px, but you can go in and take a look. I think they're usually set to like a percentage of rem space or whatever. And you can also customize that. If you want to change what the default spacing is, you can do that as well. So they have classes built in for just doing layout. They also have classes specifically for doing Flexbox and Grid CSS. They also have classes that are built for doing sizing and spacing. They also have classes for doing typography as well. They even have them for effects and filters, interactivity, and transitions and animations. So you could probably go on for days just talking about like all the different stuff you can do with transitions and animations and stuff like that. I was just trying to look at this as far as like being able to reproduce designs pretty easily and stuff like that. But that's definitely something I'm looking at exploring of using this framework. But like I was saying before, it's just using existing CSS technology. So in this case, they have some pre-built classes and stuff that you can use, but you still have to understand and know how that stuff works in order to use it. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and do a quick demo here. And so what I'm gonna go ahead and do first, and let's see if I can move this out of the way. All right, so I'm gonna go to Tailwind here. So I just want to go ahead and show what it looks like to set up a Tailwind project from scratch. So I'm going to come out here. I already have one that I've created, but I'm going to create a new one. So create a demo directory. CD into that. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a npm project and init it just to all the defaults. So we've got our default npm settings here. And now I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install Tailwind in here. So I'm going to say npm install Tailwind CSS. Let's see if there's anything. And they just want to do this for dev. So I'm going to say -d. All right, so now I've done that, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to create a source directory in here. And I'll cd into that. And let's create two files in here. I'm going to create a index.html. And we'll create a input CSS. All right, so now I've done that. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run this command here for initting the Tailwind CSS project. And what this will do is this will create the config files for Tailwind, and I think also for post CSS.
Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. I'm thinking of ordering pizza. So
Yeah, that's fine.
Meat is okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, one meat, one veggie.
Sounds good. All right. So take a look at this. You can see here that it's created a config file with Tailwind's for the Tailwind config. And so now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add some content to that, or basically this is a glob setting for content. And let's go ahead. I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code. All right. All right, so I'm coming here into the content and let's fix that. So this is set up so that you can do, array of different glob settings and stuff like that. But the key thing here is that what this will do is it will scan the source directory for any HTML or JavaScript files. And actually, let me go back and make that a little bigger so we can actually read what's in here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the HTML and I'm going to use Emmet. create a new HTML file. And we'll just create a h1 tag in here. There we go. All right. That JaxNode. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take these directives for base components and utilities and put that into the input CSS file. So go ahead and do that. So there's our input CSS. Now I've done that. What we'll go ahead and do is I'm going to come over here into the package.json and we're going to create a style watch. Oops. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Tailwind CSS or Tailwind CSS. And we're going to say -I for input, and we'll say source slash input CSS and -O. Actually, we want to do distribution folder and output CSS. And I'm going to add a flag in here. Watch. There we go. And so now if I go and run this, what this should do is it should create a output folder based off of that. And now I've done that, I'm going to come over here back into the HTML and I'm going to add a link tag. But instead of that, I'm just going to say dist and output. Not sure how it did that. All right, must be Copilot. Swim with me. All right, so now I've done that. I'm gonna come over here to my npm scripts and I'm gonna try and run that. And so we've got some bugs here. This one's expected.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. Yeah, that would cause a problem. All right. So let's try this again. That's a little better. So now we've got this distribution file, output CSS, and you can see it's just got, oh, it's kind of hard to see with this layout. We can see it's just got some base styles in here. This is only about 500, less than 500 lines long. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I want to go ahead and see if I can't run this. And I'm using a feature here called live server. So it should open that up. And here is our Hello JaxNode website. And as you can see here, this is very basic. In fact, normally we'd expect the H1 tag to create a much larger size headline type font, which it did not do here. And that's because we haven't applied any styling to this. When you use that base setting, it really does reset everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here and I'm going to try to make this a little bit smaller so we can read this. And we can see that here on this side. And what I'll do is I'll just come over here. I'm going to add a class. And I'm going to say I want to make this text. And I'm going to say 5XL. And I think it tried to increase the size here. Let's see what happened. There we go. Not sure why that didn't work. So the live server actually also has a watch feature. And what it's doing here is as I come in here and as I start adding these classes here, what it's actually gone ahead and done is now inside the output CSS, it's just added that style in here. And so as we're coming through here and we're making our changes to our design, stuff like that, it's automatically updating the style sheet for us. So it's only including the styles that we need.
Where did the rule come from?
The rule?
Yeah. Like the fact that you wrote that in HTML, it generated the CSS, right?
Yes. So basically what I did here is I've set up a style.watch. You could also do just a style.build or style build as an example here. So in my package.json here, let me go ahead and expand that out a little bit so it's a little bit easier to read. I may just, that's all easy. So you can see right here, I'm just basically calling the Tailwind CSS command from my NPM packages. And I'm setting my input to the input CSS and doing an output to the output CSS. But more importantly, in the config, Tailwind config here, what it's doing here is it's scanning all of my content. So it's going to look at any HTML or JavaScript that I'm using. And it will scan that for whatever classes that I'm using. And then what it's going to do is in the output CSS, it's going to put just the classes that I've added into my design. And the reason why this is actually a newer feature in Tailwind. So when Tailwind 3.0 came out, they really optimized it so that you're only using it. It used to be that like when you put in the directives, you'd have these giant, huge style sheets and stuff like that. And so now it does kind of like a real-time analysis and builds out your styles and stuff like that for you. So I'm going to try to change a couple other things here real quick. Let's say maybe I want to add a little padding around this, maybe a little margin. So I'm going to say margin 6. And you can see now I've got a margin around that. And maybe I want to give it a background color. So I'll say background color gray, maybe 100. So now there's a little background, I don't know how easy it is to see that over Zoom. Maybe I want to add a little padding around that. So we got some padding around that as well. So I can say padding 6. And now I've got a little padding to that. And maybe I want to make that font a little bit larger size, because typically the headlines, you want to have a font that's bold. So I can say font bold. Now I've just made it a bold font. And maybe I want to make it have that box be rounded. So now it's got a rounded box. Maybe I want to be a little bit bigger. So I can say XL. And now it's a little bit more rounded. So you can see this just by coming here and adding these little utility classes. Once you kind of learn how the utility classes work, it becomes really easy to do this. And then you can also do specific things, like if you want just to have like a margin of, let's say a top, it's a different size, whatever. Maybe you want to set it up so that maybe you have a slightly smaller size for smaller screen. You can come in here and you can specify these different screen sizes. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to come back in here and go to the Tailwind config and go into my themes here. And so what I'm going to say is I want to give it a screen. And I'm going to use the, right now, Copilot is giving me my my sizes here, and I want to come up with a different sized Excel here. And I want to say, instead of 1280 pixels, I want to make this 1140 pixels. And let's see here. And I'll leave that for my styles here. And then what I can do is I can also come in here and I can specify that I want to use a container. Container. Or maybe not. I'll say, let me come back to that. I want to try something real quick. Right here, you can see here that it's resizing this. Now, if I want to, I can come over here to my index here, and I can set it up here that, so once I go to, let's say, a medium-sized file, maybe I want to use a smaller font. So I'm going to say medium, And I'm going to say text, and I'm going to say 2XL. And then maybe let's change one more thing. Maybe for the medium, I also want to use a font extra bold. So now if I come here and start resizing this, nothing's happening. All right, let's take a look at it. Did I save this?
I think it's the same. It's similar. There's a syntax error in your JSON.
Oh,
Now-
okay.
now You need a comma. You're missing a comma between. You can fit it there.
Ah, you're right. Pleasures of live coding.
Always a comment.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I may have to restart that. So let me kill this. That's better. Okay, so now we can actually see that here. So it actually did change the size of that. So now if I come in here and I expand this to like a larger size, nothing's oh, there we go. So you can see here it used the larger size, the default size for what would be kind of like our smallest size. And then what it's doing is it's making it smaller when I expand it out. Not exactly sure why you want to design something like that, but that's the kind of flexibility you have. And so it's very common, it makes it very easy for doing stuff where maybe you have like 3 columns, but once you shrink it down to, let's say, like an iPad size device or a phone size device, that it just re-renders that stuff so that they're on top of each other instead of next to each other. So that's one of the things I really, really like about this. And so
What does the output CSS look like after you write that medium content?
let's take a look. So I'm gonna come back in here and let's take a look at the output CSS. Yeah,
Throw a media query in?
I believe it. Let's take a look. Yes, it does. As a matter of fact, so here it actually is. It's actually created a media query and stuff for us. So that's basically, how the basics of this stuff work. But one of the things that I decided I wanted to try to do is I wanted to try to do redo a website using Tailwind. And so the original website for the JaxNode User Group, people actually come and use this. This is the original one. And if you look at this, this looks very, very, very bootstrappy. And that's because I use Bootstrap to actually lay it out. And so one of the things I want to try to do is I wonder how difficult it'd be to actually come back and redo this using more modern type CSS, maybe Flexbox and good CSS, as well as using Tailwind. So let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and exit out of here. Let me go ahead and kill this one. So we'll kill that. I'm going to kill this window and get out of that. So I'm going to go to the project I have here called JaxNode Next. And this is actually one of the things I wanted to do is last month we did a presentation on Next.js. And so I wanted to take a look and see how difficult it would be to redo this Express site that used Bootstrap, using Tailwind, and using Next.js. So let me go ahead. And I'm going to start this up. All right, so now come back here to the browser and let's come here and take a look at the new and improved JaxNode website. Okay, so not radically different, but I did use Tailwind actually do this. And so if you look right here, I did change the menu a little bit here so that it actually changes the background when you hover over the buttons. And then I also have it set up so that when you actually come in and go to a smaller screen size, let's say like an iPad, it relays out, as you can see here, I have a section that has like all of the Twitter. I do a lot of retweeting on the JaxNode Twitter site of things that are related to Node and React and things like that. And so I keep that on here. And then I also keep information about upcoming meetings and stuff like that as well as on here as well. But you can see here, it's automatically coming through here and relaying all this stuff out. And then I have apps page, which has some different apps and stuff that we have available. And here you can see I use drop shadows and routed corners and stuff like that. It's very easy to do using this. The contact page, we have a code page. And this lets you see all the different stuff that's in our GitHub repos. And so you can come through here. And this is all using React, Next.js, and Tailwind to lay all this stuff out. So let's take a quick look at that code just to see how I did some of this stuff. So if you're not familiar with Next.js, you can do pages just like you would do with with PHP or something like that. So here, I have a page, and the way it works is that you just essentially create like a React component, and it just outputs the React component as a page. And so you can do, you can have layouts and stuff that you want to use and stuff like that. If you look right inside of here, obviously since I'm using React, you can't just use class because they will confuse that with the actual class keyword in JavaScript. But when you use class name here, you just put your classes in here just like you would if you were doing like a regular HTML style layout here. And so I created just a basic flex layout, and I have it set up so that it switches from columns to rows once you hit that medium size point. And let's see here, what else did I do a little bit different? So we also have in this Tailwind config size, I came up with a couple different sizes here, but you can see here with the content. Before I just specified a source for that previous example. Here, and with Next you have pages and you also have components, so you have to specify in the content to scan both of those, and to also look for JSX files. And then I have a couple colors that I added in here as well, but it's pretty much straight. This is a simple Tailwind. There's not a lot of special stuff. Since it is Next, I did have to configure post CSS and auto prefixer in order to use it. And one of the things that's really nice about their style guide or their documentation is you actually go and take a look at their documentation for how you install this. They have framework guides. And so if you're using something like Laravel or using Vite or Ruby on Rails and stuff like that, you can come to these specific pages they have, and it tells you exactly what you need to do in order for this stuff to install it and use it with your framework of your choice. They don't have Express on here, but you can do a search real quick. It's actually pretty simple how you set this up for Express. That's pretty nice. So with that, I want to kind of go through and talk a little bit about their documentation, how to use their documentation for doing this stuff. So they actually do have a playground. So you can come over here to their playground and you can just start changing stuff. So for instance, like if I want to change this background color to 500, you can just come in here and you can start changing things. And you can start seeing a live preview of that. And so this is really nice because like if you don't want to bother having to get all the stuff installed and running and stuff like that to start taking a look at how this stuff works, you can just use their playgrounds to do that. The other thing, okay, leave that site. They also have lots of screencasts and other resources. I believe they have in their community page. This is just pointing to their GitHub repo where you can go and have discussions. And then when you get into the core concepts, they kind of describe, the kinds of things you need to do to be able to do stuff like supporting dark mode, reusing styles. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It's like one of the complaints I think that people have about Tailwind is like you have to put all these different classes all into your specific tags. And one of the things they do here, I think is pretty nice, is they show different ways to kind of streamline that. So it's not a pain. So here they're saying, oh, you can just do multi-cursor editing, stuff like that, which I think is fine for a lot of people. But if you're using a templating framework like here, if you're just going to repeat something over and over again, just repeat over and over again. Don't worry about it. But then, like in the earlier example that I showed before, one of the things they have here at towards the end of their documentation is they actually have a place where they show you how you can use the apply to take all these different styles you might be using and then apply it into a single class that you can use. So now you can just use one class and do it that way. So if there is something you're going to be reusing over and over again in different parts of your layouts, they make it pretty easy to set that up. So if you do want to do that, you can still do that. Then under the customization, they get into all the different things that you can do with the configuration. So something I think is pretty common is when you're working on a layout and stuff like that, I know that I like to have whatever content I have on my page actually centered on the page. So no matter how wide somebody makes the page, you can set like a specific screen size. And so one of the things that's nice is that like normally you could do a margin left right auto where it will automatically center things and stuff like that. And you can do the same thing here. You can use an MX-auto as a class. But one of the things that they allow you here to do the styles is that you can actually come up with a container specifying setting. And then under that container, what you could do is you can say center true. And then if you specify that, then you don't have to worry about adding the MX auto. It'll just do that automatically to your container class. So that's kind of handy. Then they have shortcuts and stuff for doing columns. So if you want to do multi-column layouts and stuff like that, you can do that using their specific classes. But in my case, I've been using Flex and Grid CSS, and so they show examples here of how you can use all the different Flex layout styles, as well as the Grid CSS styles. And they even show you here how you can set up different Flex spaces. So they make it very easy to kind of go through here. And then they have like a standard gap style that you can use as well for creating the space between your different boxes. And then they do a pretty good job explaining how the padding and the margin works. So you can see here by specifying top, right, bottom, left, whatever, you can apply specific spaces and stuff like that around your box or inside of your box with either the padding or the margin. Then I think that something else they've done that's pretty good is they also have this concept of like how you'd use like a max width and stuff like that. And so instead of having to type the whole style out, you can say max W0. But something else that's cool about this, I come back in here to my demo and open that up. One of the things I can do, open that up a little bit. There we go. is if I want to make this like a specific size, for instance, I can say width, and let's say we want to make this 500 px. Something that's nice about this, if I come back here and run this, and we go and open this up. Is now I've just set this up with a space or with a width that's going to be set to 500 pixels. And if I come here and take a look at the output CSS, we can see here that it should have created a width. Yeah. So here's our width 500 px. So just by coming here and using my brackets and stuff like that, I'll auto-generate a new class for us for that specific size. So that's something else that's also pretty handy. You can do the same thing with colors as an example. So if you want to specify a specific color, you can put that inside of brackets and do that as well. So it's really nice, it's really flexible for doing that kind of stuff. We go back to the slides. So are there any questions related to what I've shown so far? All right. No questions. Well,
Could you go back over that brackets part one more time that you just did?
sure. So let's actually take a look at the docs for that real quick. So just as an example here, let's see if I can find, let's go to height as an example here. So you can see right here, what they've done is if you want to make something that's just 1 pixel, you can say h-px, it'll do 1 px, but you can also do like 0.51 and it'll use like a specific rem size, but you can see here that it's not using a full rem size, it's using 0.125, 0.25. So an H1 would be a 0.25 rem. This is an example, but more specifically here, if you put the H inside of here, they're using like, looks like curly braces here. It's going to use that setting here. So you can see here, they're specifying, a specific size here. And then what it's using this, essentially this algorithm here for the different sizes for deciding how much rem space to use for a specific measurement that you've used. But you can also do, let's see here. You can use the square brackets. Let's see if I can find that in here. Yeah, so here's an example here where they specified a height that's 32 rem in size, and they're just putting that inside of a bracket. So if you want to, you could also do 500 px as an example, and it'll auto-generate a class with that size matching that. So you can do that with widths, heights, max widths, max heights, that sort of thing, and it'll generate that stuff. And so there's sometimes you want something just to be, I just need this to be 350 pixels in width and stuff like that. And so,
Okay.
yeah, so you can use one of the predefined sizes that they've created. Like you could use W-36 as an example, but in my head or whatever, I'm just kind of used to certain pixel sizes or rem sizes and stuff like that. So a lot of times I'll just type in that specific size when I do that. So I just kind of conclude with kind of like my overall impressions of Tailwind. So the thing I like about it is that it saves me time. I don't have to go through and author a separate CSS file. I can just do everything real quickly. And there's a lot of conventions now with some of the different frameworks. Like I know with React and Next, it's real popular to use like inline styles where you'll come up with a style, but do it specifically inside of the component itself. And there's a lot of times where, and this is also common in Next and React as well, where people will create a module CSS. So you'll write like a component, and then you have like a, whatever that component name is, .module.css, and then you'll include that. So you can include specific styles for that specific component, stuff like that. I just find this, it's a lot less complicated. I don't have to write as much CSS. And once you get around the conventions and stuff that they're using, it's not bad. Plus, they optimize or automatically optimizing the style sheet so that you're only putting in there exactly what you need. Whereas if I was pulling in, let's say, Bootstrap or something like that, even when it's minimized and stuff like that, there's a lot of stuff in there that I'm not using. And so this essentially is doing the tree shaking, making sure that I'm not including anything that I don't need in my design, my layout. So that's all I had. That was about an hour's worth. If anybody has any more questions, you can ask me now, or you can just contact me after the meeting, and I can help you out with whatever questions you might have. All right. Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. We are meeting in person now. I think we're going to continue doing the Zoom meetings and stuff like that, just because I know there's still a lot of people that are like working from home and stuff like that. Or people that obviously they still have concerns about a certain contagious virus that's been going around. So that being said, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and for watching, and I hope everybody has a nice rest of the week.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, I'm going to end the meeting.
So you say you've only been using